Welcome to Divine Feminine Rising with Mez Delene. I'm Mez Delene, and my intention with this podcast is to entertain, educate, and illuminate as I share the power and magic of the Divine Feminine. Thank you so much for being here. I'm grateful for your time and attention. I wanted to share something with you. When I started this podcast, I had an idea. Actually, I had a plan of where I was going to go with it. And I had planned out, I think, 10 podcasts, and then that didn't happen. You might wonder what that's about. Sometimes I wonder what that's about. But I follow my guidance, and I feel like I am definitely in alignment with the Divine Feminine, and that being in alignment with the Divine Feminine means being open and being intuitive and using my feminine gifts in the world. And one of those gifts is me following my guidance and trusting where I'm led. So each podcast, each week, seems to come from something that happens in my life as I'm just going through the motions of my life. It sparks a creative urge to follow a certain theme for my next podcast. And I always have stories to tell that support that theme. So this week, I was at an event with my Aura camera, and it's a big event, and lots of people are there. As I was setting up my Aura camera and getting ready for the next morning when the show opened, a woman came up to me, and she was happy to meet me in person. She said she'd been following me, and I asked her what her name was, and she told me, and I said, well, I've been following you too. She's someone that I knew on Facebook. So it was really fun to meet someone in person who I had met on Facebook. As we continued to talk, she told me that she knew me from the time of Jarita. And Jarita was the magazine I used to publish that was a Middle Eastern dance magazine. And my last publication was over 10 years ago. So this woman had been following me for quite a while. I started following her on Facebook probably about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. So this just really touched me deeply, right? That this person knew who I was, knew things about me, and so forth. And it got me to thinking about that. And it's something I think is important for us to talk about, important for us to be aware of, important to be conscious of this, how people are watching us. I've always known this on different levels in my life, and so I've always felt the importance of being as loving as possible in the world, and I try to foster that in other people. It's just very important. So in reality, if you've been a parent or even an aunt or an uncle, or how about a teacher at a school, like an elementary school, this starts in our childhood. We watched our parents, we watched our teachers, we watched our relatives and neighbors as children, and that's how we learned how to be in the world, right? That's how we learned how to walk and talk and how to act, by watching other people, observing and learning. I remember once when a woman told me that her daughter called her a big fat pig, and she was just sobbing. My daughter called me a big fat pig this morning. Her daughter was 3, okay? And I looked at this woman and I said, You've looked in the mirror and called yourself a big fat pig, haven't you? And she stopped crying and her eyes widened and she said, yes, I have, because I am. And so I explained to her that her little girl was just copying her. Her little 3-year-old daughter loved her. She didn't have the awareness that that was a bad thing to say because she heard her mother saying it about herself. She was watching her mother, learning from her mother. And I'm hoping that I changed this woman's mindset right there and that she was more careful what she said in front of her daughter. Often we don't realize that little ears are listening and learning all the time. I see people talking in front of their children and saying things that really shouldn't be said in front of small children unless they want it broadcast to the elementary school, because kids hear, they learn, and they also repeat. So teachers in elementary schools can tell you what kind of parenting or home life kids have because of what they say and how they act. I was a second grade teacher for a couple of years, and I can tell you stories, but I'll give you a couple of examples. One time, this little boy, he hit himself in the face and he says, "I'm just dumb Danny." And right there, my heart just kind of broke, and I bent down to him. He was just a little tiny guy. And I said, "Did you hear that?" He said, "That's what my mom calls me. And that's what my brother calls me." And I said, "Well, that's not nice." And I explained to him that that wasn't a nice thing, which he already knew. And I said, "I don't want to hear you calling yourself that, because it upsets me when somebody calls someone I care about names or they say mean things to them. And if you're saying it to yourself, then that upsets me because I care about you and I don't want anybody, not even you, saying mean things to you." And that little boy just kind of, I could tell he was concentrating really strongly on what I was saying, and he was hearing what I was saying, and he was taking it in. And I have to say, he never called himself that again. And the reality of the situation was he was extremely bright, but he was behind in his studies because we'd just gone through COVID and he hadn't been able to do schooling online and was brought back to school and expected to be up to par with the rest of the kids. And I told him that. I explained that to him, and I told him that he was very smart, and this was before I really knew he was very smart. And it turns out he's highly intelligent, and he caught up really fast. But he had heard and seen things in his home that led him to believe there was something wrong with him. Another time, this little boy got up in class. He stood up and made an announcement. He's just this adorable little child, and he says, "I'm white, and you're white, and everybody in here is white." And I had already suspected that his dad was a white supremacist. And as he said this, he looked around the room and he kind of stuttered a little bit on the last sentence because not everybody in the room was white. And so Miss Mez held up a piece of paper, and I said, "I want you to look at this piece of paper." And he looks at it. Of course, the whole class was looking at it. And I said, "This piece of paper is white." And I held it up next to my face. I said, "Is this what color I am?" And they're like, "No." I said, "Do you know anybody this color?" "No." And so it just popped out of me. I didn't know how else to deal with this. But the point I was making and the point that they got was that we weren't all the same color. And we certainly weren't the color of white that piece of paper showed. And then I went on to say something like that, where, we're all different and we're all different shades and we're all equally important or whatever came out of my mouth at the time. And I never heard anything like that again from this child. I saw in his eyes an awareness as I spoke. Other thing we see as teachers are kids who are cussing. And that's something they learn at home, or whether they learn it from the people around them or they see it on TV, which means that at home they're not being monitored for what they watch on TV. And the biggest thing is disrespect. When I saw disrespect, for instance, when a child was doing show and tell and another kid interrupts them, I would ask the person doing show and tell to wait just a minute, and I would look at the kid who interrupted and I'd say, I want you to respect Charlie, who is standing up here in front of everybody, which isn't easy, and giving us a show and tell. I want you to respect him the way you would want someone to respect you when you were up here speaking in front of people. And then the same thing when I would be talking, I would be teaching something, and the kids would start a conversation with each other, and I would stop and I would say, excuse me, I am speaking. And if you are talking to each other, that's being disrespectful to me. And I don't appreciate that. I want you to respect me, but I also want you to be respected. So I will listen to you when you're talking, and I expect you to listen to me when I'm talking. So you see that kids are not learning respect at home. Some kids, right? And then there's the whole parenting thing. When I was a parent, one of the things about me that is reality is I am terrified of spiders. Terrified. Give me a snake any day. I can even hold a scorpion in my hand, but spiders terrify me. Supposedly, that's not a fear that we're born with, so I don't know where it came from. I just know it's real. I didn't want to put that on my own children. So around my children, I never showed a fear of spiders. So one day my daughter comes up to me and she has a spider in her hand, and it's her little friend, and she's playing with it. Imagine how I felt. Imagine keeping that terror inside of me and not screaming. And then the spider jumped out of her hand, and it had like the web coming from it. And so then it became a yo-yo for her. And then it finally escaped, and it ran under the stove, and she cried because her little friend ran away. So I was terrified of spiders, but my daughter certainly wasn't. I didn't want to pass that on to her. We can choose who we want to be in the world, right? We can choose whether we want to be a loving expression in the world. Do we want people to feel loved, accepted, and supported? Or do we want to just come across as caring about ourselves and not caring about anybody else? Or coming across as being angry all the time? So how can we make a difference? By being more kind and loving, because I believe that we do make a difference when we are. The main thing is to stay conscious. Stay conscious. You can't control the world. You can't control how other people act, but you can control how you respond to the world and how you respond to how other people act. Don't let other people pull you into their drama. Remind yourself that if they're acting like jerks, they are suffering from some type of fear. They might feel like they're being judged as not good enough. They might fear their needs are not being met, and so forth. But that doesn't really matter. What matters is how you react and respond. I have a story about reputation. People sometimes worry about their reputation, and I always tell people, no one can hurt your reputation but you. And so this story is about my friend and I going to an event, and it was a big event. It was a belly dance event. There were lots of dancers there, and we walked into the room, and there was these two other dancers, I'll call them A and B, and we walked up to them. They were from our town, and we greeted them and we said, "Hi, how are you?" And they gave us, both of them, gave us a dirty look and turned around and walked away. And my friend was very upset. She says, "I can't believe that just happened." And she was going to go after him. I don't know what she was going to say, but I put my hand on her arm and I just gave her a look. And I just kind of whispered, "Just smile." Later, she says, "What was that about? They were acting like creeps, and that wasn't right." And I said, "Well, what that was about is that a bunch of people witnessed that happen." And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "They witnessed us be friendly and loving towards those women, and they witnessed them being unfriendly and unloving. And in fact, they were rude. So they made themselves look bad. We didn't have to do anything or say anything. They made themselves look bad." That's how it works in the world. You just be loving and kind no matter what other people are doing. And that's like a superpower that you can develop. Another story in the belly dance world is my ex-husband asked me one time, "Why do you always go to Elsa's events when she doesn't come to yours?" And I told him I went for myself, not for her. I went to see my friends and to watch the dancing and enjoy myself. And he just shook his head like he just wasn't really getting it. And one night we were out to dinner after a big belly dance event, and there was 20 people at this table. Had all these tables put together, and there was at least 20 of us. And I was at one end of the table, and another person was at the other end of the table, and she was a big name in the business. And she yelled all the way across the table, "Hey, Mez Delene, why do you always go to Elsa's events? She never comes to yours." And I just looked at my husband, and his eyes just kind of lit up like, "Oh, yeah, people notice. People are watching. People notice. They notice me being a nice and kind person. That's who I am. That's who I want to be in the world. That's who I choose to be in the world." So people pay attention. It's important, even in small ways, to be kind. For instance, how many times have you seen someone yelling at a checker in the grocery store? They're yelling at him because the prices are too high or because they were out of stock of something that they needed or something like that. That's just crazy. That checker doesn't have the power over how much is ordered of that stock. They aren't the ones who set the prices in the store, and yet people get angry at them for things that they have no control over. That just isn't cool. It's rude, disrespectful, and it's being unconscious in the world. Yeah, you might be upset about that. If you're that upset, go talk to the manager. Or just leave and take a breather. Don't vent on other people, especially people who they're just innocent. Being conscious is smiling at people even when you feel down. And guess what? When you smile, it releases endorphins and it raises your mood while raising the moods of the people who receive your smiles. It's a win-win situation there. Give compliments. You can always find something to compliment people for. Sometimes I say, "That color looks great on you. I love that dress that you're wearing," things like that. Or, "I love your hair. I love your lipstick." Simple little things. And you'll get an instant reaction. I don't think there's anything more rewarding than getting instant validation that you did something good, right? You say, "That color looks great on you," and someone, they're in their own mind, they might be worried about something, or they're thinking about how they're going to afford to pay the bills that month or something, and they're just walking down the street, and this perfect stranger says something looks good on them, and it startles them, and it lights them up. They light up. I love it. They're not expecting it. It happens to me sometimes. People say something to me, like the other day I walked in somewhere and this man said, I love those colors. I was wearing a purple shirt and a purple skirt. Purple's my favorite color. And I did not expect that. And it lifted me up, lifted my spirits. Another way to be conscious is to be a safe person for other people. And by that, I mean, be the person or a person who they can rely on to be there for them, for a hug or for support, or maybe just an ear or a shoulder to cry on, or someone that they can vent with, who they know will keep that confidential, because sometimes we get upset and we need to talk it through. And it's important to have a safe person to be able to talk things through with. I know that we all need that at some time or another. I know for myself, whether I'm upset or I just have a problem I'm trying to solve, it really helps me to talk to other people. And as I talk, I hear myself and I come up with my own solutions often. Sometimes I get really good advice from people. Sometimes people just listen. And because what I'm talking about, they have no way of solving for me, but it helps me to solve it myself. So it really is important to be a safe person and also have safe people in your life. I used to vend in belly dance land. I sold costuming and I sold my magazine, Jurita, and I sold jewelry, just different things that belly dancers needed. And my ex-husband always helped out. And if I didn't have something, I would tell people where they could get it. And sometimes I would just take them and say, here, let me show you. And I'd walk across the room and say, here, right? And my husband just couldn't believe I did that. He's like, why do you do that? And I said, because I didn't have what they needed and I wanted to help them out, right? It just made sense to me. And he just thought that it was a waste of my time and whatever. I don't know what he thought, but probably 20 minutes after he said that one time, the lady that I had led across the room showed up back at my table with a friend in tow, and she said, here, she has it, buy it from her. She's a really nice lady. Good lesson for my husband, right? Another way of staying conscious and remembering that people are watching is to be nice to the ex, whether it's a husband or a wife, if there are kids involved. If there are no kids involved, you don't ever have to talk to your ex again. But if there are kids involved in your divorce, it's important to be civil with the ex. I know that this isn't always possible. I know that some people are too toxic or perhaps too drunk, whatever, to work with. But if at all possible, work it out for your kids' sake. If nothing else, be kind on your end. Don't badmouth the other parent, because your kids will figure it out, trust me. So in my family, last year in the holidays, there were 3 ex-husbands celebrating with me, my kids, and grandkids. There was the father of each of my kids, so 2 of the ex-husbands were mine, and then my grandchildren's father, my daughter's ex-husband. And that's how we celebrate family holidays. And I know that's not common, but more and more people are learning how to get along. Ex-wives are friends with the new wives and so forth. And I know this local restaurant where I met the family. It's a family-run restaurant. In fact, the owner of the restaurant owns another restaurant, and he introduced me to his son who ran this restaurant, and then his other son and his ex-wife who ran the other restaurant, and introduced me to his current wife. It was just so heartwarming to see that I'm not the only one who gets along with the exes, right? Now, I'm not saying it isn't always easy, and it isn't always instant. It might take a while, but it can happen. What I want you to remember is that on an energetic level, we are all connected. It may seem unbelievable. It may seem like we can't understand how that works, but it's the truth. Everything is comprised of energy. And what you do and what you say has an energetic impact in that field of energy, which we are all connected to. So it's like that ripple that crosses the pond. You toss the little stone in, it makes a bigger ripple, and then it ripples all the way across the pond. When it gets to the other side, it might be tiny and subtle, but it had an effect. It still reached the other side. It went across the whole pond. That's how our energy is. When we do something, it goes across the whole energetic field. So everything we do and every word we say holds energy. You get to choose whether or not you express a positive and higher energetic vibration in the world or a lower negative vibration. That's your choice. We all have that choice. Remember, people are watching, children are watching and learning, and you have the power to create positive change for all. And I want you to know that I love you so much. I feel so much love when I'm doing this. And I just ask that the words come out of me that people need to hear. And that hopefully I can be of service by doing this podcast and bring more love into the world. Thank you for joining me today. My mission is to help bring back the balance of the divine feminine to spirituality. Please share my podcast with anyone who might be interested in the divine feminine and personal empowerment. And if you'd like to connect with me further, feel free to reach out. My email is mezdelene@mezdelene.com, and you can find me online at mezdelene.com, Divine Feminine Rising with mezdelene.com, Mez Delene Bliss or Mez Delene on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. And please join my mailing list if you'd like to receive my newsletter. Allow the light of your love to shine. Be the change. Lead the way. And always remember, your light of love is a needed gift to the world that only you can give.